You look at the books they're reading or recommending sometimes, which have bad theology in them, not healthy. And as a person, for me, who didn't grow up in this, and I don't have the blood ties to it that a lot of these guys do, which is what you hear a lot. I'm a seventh generation LCMS pastor's kid, or something like that. Like that's and then everybody else gets called a Pharisee, but that's like the most Pharisaical argument I can think of. I'm Lutheran because my dad was. So, I come in and I know as a person who was studying theology outside of Lutheranism that when there are a few things that sort of readily identify something as Lutheran. And it's, of course, the theology of the Book of Concord, but it is also liturgics. It's the externals as well. And going to a Christian college that was steeped in all of the modern evangelical stuff and even had a hand in inventing some of the stuff, I have a lot of concerns when I see a Lutheran worship service that looks indistinguishable from a big box evangelical church.
Welcome to Synod Stories, a show about the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, its past, present, and future. Besides learning about the LCMS National Convention, I started this podcast to learn more about what life was like across the Synod. To that end, I have Pastor Willie Grills, who is pastor of Zion Lutheran Church in Alexander, Arkansas, and one of the hosts of the podcast, A Brief History of Power. Grills Sensei, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So we have this running bit about our common Japanese heritage.
Correct. Yeah.
And in some ways, you probably actually have a better understanding of formal historical Japanese culture than I do, because mine's kind of like a Japanese American culture that's been handed down from like farmers. For example, the first time I heard you talking about a tsuba, I could have sworn I thought you were talking about spit, because my dad when he would tell me, like he would teach me to shine shoes, he was like, make sure you use lots of tsuba when you're shining your shoes. So where does this interest in historical Japanese culture come from?
So I think anybody who as a male and into history has to have some interest in Japan, right? It's most of its history is simply war history. And even its the Edo period, which is the peaceful period, is still, most of the interesting stories involve at least a duel at some point or some kind of revenge killing. So always kind of interested in that. Then you get the Christian perspective, and as a kid, I was very interested in like Jesuit history, just because it's kind of a very interesting story. They go out to these very different cultures and evangelize, but wasn't a Christian at the time, just more interested in the hardships that they faced. And so you got the whole Christian angle there, but the whole Japanese history is just extremely fascinating, and it requires a historian who's based in English to learn a lot of new words and learn a lot of new names and how to read those names and those sorts of things. And then, then you start looking like, so you talk about like the tsuba, which is the handguard for a Japanese sword, and not to be confused with the ska, which is the handle. Getting into that was kind of a long and silly story too, but that forced me to dig deeper into Japanese terminology, but it also forced me to dig deeper into Japanese history. And so everything just kind of grows and grows from there. Japanese, there's a bigger learning curve to learn anything about Japan, which I appreciate. It's closed off, so it forces you to really dig deeper than you normally would with, say, English history or something like that.
Yeah, whatever you get, I'm sure there's like multiple layers, because I know that we're very closed off and like we have many sides to us people.
Right. Yeah, the 4 faces, 4 hearts, or whatever it is. Maybe it's 3, but
on a more serious note, I'd like to go back to your religious background. Like, what was your faith background, and what did your faith look like in your home growing up?
There really wasn't much of that. Growing up in Eastern Kentucky, a little bit like being here in Arkansas, less like being in California, where everybody is culturally Christian. For my family that were Christian and were devout, mostly Christian holiness churches, a fair number of Church of Christ, Christian church kind of people. So like everybody, you would get taken every once in a while by an aunt or uncle to church, or you would get dragged to every vacation Bible school. You just make those rounds in the summer. I didn't really get serious about my faith until, honestly, late high school, but definitely in college. where I cut my theological teeth, but that was in confessional Reformed circles, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, and made contact with an LCMS pastor, which led me to read the confessions, really study Lutheranism in depth, both historically and, of course, systematically. And it was kind of nice not having to jump through hoops regarding how to interpret the sacraments, things like that. And everything just sort of fell into place because of the sacraments.
So was that where you kind of felt like things made sense, or where you felt you belonged? Was it going through the confessions? Is that kind of?
Yes, at least theologically. Then very quickly, you kind of learned that much like the Japanese, if you are not a cradle Lutheran, people are going to look at you suspiciously, for a long
Even if
time.
you are, even if you're slightly look like an outsider, they look at you askance.
You should probably adopt a German name if you want to be fully accepted.
Yeah,
that's how Kuntz was able to slip in.
That's because, like, if I go to Japan, I'm looked at with suspicion because I'm an American for sure. But no.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand their suspicion. I get it.
So, at what point did the pastoral office come into view for you?
It came, fairly, even in the Presbyterian time, that epoch. They saw my interest in theology, and I was very active in the church, so it came from local encouragement to go. I don't have a Paul on the road to Damascus story. My favorite stories are guys who went to Lutheran grade school, Lutheran high school, one of the Concordias, and then we're sitting in seminary together, and they majored in pre-sim, and they're like, "Well, I've just fought the call, and now I'm here." So I don't have a story like that, quite like that.
So, how did you decide between, at the time, Fort Wayne and St. Louis? What was there, what questions came, or what like drew you to one over the other?
Yeah, whether right or wrong, Fort Wayne at the time I think was broadly seen as more conservative confessional than St. Louis. I know that's kind of a loaded sort of thing, but I'll put it this way: it was definitely seen as the more traditional seminary, which is that's the waters that I swim in, and so. If you wanted the liturgical experience, so on and so forth, that was the reputation that Fort Wayne had. Also, just practically living in Fort Wayne, a little bit easier than moving down to St. Louis.
So I stumbled across this information, and so correct me if I'm wrong. Did you do your vicarage in Peru? Is that correct?
I served in Peru for a time, and then completed my vicarage in Iowa East District.
Okay. What was the Peru, or how did you get there?
Initially, that's where I was assigned, and then there was some reshuffling, and so I ended up in Iowa. So,
did you explicitly pursue that, or how did that opportunity even come about, I guess?
The seminary approached me about it and kind of went from there. It was a different time for missionaries. This was during the big build-up. After the missionaries were kind of pulled, then there was a big push from convention to bring them out. And it was kind of everybody trying to figure out what they're doing at the time. Tons of new people, new fundraising. My understanding is that the OIM really has that's Office of International Ministry, for the folks who know, have really streamlined that process for the missionaries going out today. I mean, that's been a while ago now. So that, that continues on that end. So kind of a different world, I think, today from those days, at least from what I've been told.
And then, so can you talk about how you finished up or how things went, like in the ending of that?
I won't go into it too much, but it was just, things were just different there, and so it was decided that a change needed to be made, and so came back and was put in Iowa, which is a big change from Peru. There is a Peru, Indiana, which I imagine is much more similar to Cedar Falls, Iowa. But a great time in Iowa. Pastor Knox, wonderful man, affiliated with the ACELC. So, very good dude. Great congregation there. Great little town in Iowa. There are good places in Iowa, believe it or not. If you ever want to retire, I guess you could look toward there. Might be cheaper than California. We're going to get you down to Arkansas. You had some family here, maybe against their wishes at one point, but you've got family ties. So yeah, that was in a shell, kind of how things shook out.
So, and on A Word Fitly Spoken, I think early on you mentioned that you were in Iowa, like at a Spanish-speaking congregation. Is that
Correct.
the
My
same?
first
Is
call
that
out of seminary.
Oh,
No, not the
first
same
call.
place. Yeah, first
Okay.
call
Okay.
was to a Spanish-speaking church in Western Iowa, not far from Omaha.
Okay. And how is that like? Because it was always fascinating to me because you had this congregation. Dr. Kuntz is very much into missions and church planting, and then Pastor Heidi, from what I could understand, somewhere in the hinterlands, he had a multi-point parish. Is that right? And so, like, I guess the Fort Wayne knock and kind of like the confessional side of things would like not line those three of you up in some way. So how did that come about between the three of you? And it because it seems not like a standard Fort Wayne kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, I guess in one sense you could say it was just the hand of the Lord, right? Who brings us where we are. But it is a question of focus, and some people are going to be much better suited to the sort of typical parish life where say the black, do the red, and they'll make a go of it. Some congregations will dwindle with that. But I think I can speak for all three of us when we believe that the Lutheran Confessions are a true exposition of Scripture, and evangelism is necessary. Jesus sends us into the world to evangelize, and so there has to be an outward focus in doing that. A lot of what we deal with today are guys who are in parishes that need revitalization on top of evangelization. And you can do both simultaneously. You can do one or you can do the other, but there is no option where you can't do anything. Like just maintaining the status quo is not really the way to grow a church, and it's not the way to have a healthy and sustainable church. If a church isn't reaching out in some way, and a lot of times when we say this, people of a certain theological stream will think we mean big, giant outreach programs. It really doesn't have to be like that. It can be very organic, very natural, reminding the members of what they have, the treasures they have, getting them enthused. I'll use a very loaded term there, for what we have in the Lutheran Church, and then they're inviting people, creating a church that is welcoming, and by that I just simply mean friendly, that people will actually want to go and be comfortable learning a little bit more. And I don't mean this in a worldly way. Like if you're just nice and goofy and smile, people are going to show up and your church is going to grow. That's not what we're saying. But making yourself accessible to a certain degree, making the church a comfortable, welcoming place for people. Not comfortable in the sense of compromising on doctrine, but again, just simply like something like this, like, hey, welcome to our church. Good to see you today. Not just going to your assigned pew and hanging back forever. When we get caught up in, at seminary, you're debating over prayer rules a lot of times and which vestments and this or that. And you can lose a lot of things when you're only focused on that kind of thing. Those things can probably be secondary to the actual preaching of the gospel. Do I wear a chasuble? Of course. As a good Jesuit, I'm going to fiddle back. It's also hot in Arkansas. But if I had to only preach in an alb, or if I had to only preach, heaven forbid, in a suit, right? Could we still be effective? Does that change the gospel? And it doesn't. Now, these things can really improve what we do, and it really highlights our Lutheran witness. There's a place to contend for those things. But sometimes it's presented as an either or. You're either in a polo shirt and really good at evangelism, or you're in a chasuble and you're ringing the church bell thinking that's going to bring the elect in. And I think both of those stereotypes aren't really fair. At the same time, I can say in some cases they're certainly earned. And so we both just had this outward, or all three of us had this outward focus, but we also had a strong historical focus. In the history of the early Missouri Synod are a lot of pastors going out, not really being compensated well, and just riding their horses and gathering in the people and really having great success there. So you take inspiration from these people. That's the great part about history. We have these accounts that can really motivate us towards something better.
So looking at your congregations and is there seem to be a through line through, for all three, all the congregations you've been at? They seem to be smaller or more like less traditional, I guess.
Less traditional, like not liturgically, but just
but less...
in a way, in one sense, so from Iowa, I went to a very traditional German church in Illinois, and just great people there, very well catechized. It was like pastoring on easy mode, you know, with that. I'm very thankful for the men who came before, and just just good salt of the earth, Midwestern farm types. Here, great people, wonderful people, but a lot of people, because we are in the Baptist Belt, tend to think in Baptist categories. I mean, how do I get saved? Even just the term "get saved" is, that's a loaded theological statement there. So going through that, the people. So in Illinois, most of the people I'm bumping into who aren't in the church are already Lutheran or they're Catholic. That was most of what you dealt with. Here it's mostly Baptist. What is a Lutheran? They look at us like the Mormons. So you really have to go back to fundamentals when you talk about things. And that's one of the things that we could be better at in the Missouri Synod. And I say this for world missions, local missions, whatever. We need to be careful when speaking in theological shorthand, because that people don't understand that. They don't know what it means. We have to really unpack our terms, explain them in the simplest way. And especially down here, they look at you like you're a Mormon, and then you say, okay, I'm going to prove my doctrine by quoting the Small Catechism, which they don't know what that is. So to them, it's just another Book of Mormon. That it's just a German Book of Mormon to them. So, to avoid that inside stuff, we just have to re-equip ourselves in explaining things in elementary terms to begin and then to build off of.
Do you find that that's pretty much true anywhere at this point? I mean,
more and more, yeah, because even in traditional Lutheran areas, you find people don't know the Bible, people don't know the basics of the faith, and so you have to, you just have to treat them like babies, in a spiritual sense, because that's what they are. So you just explain things in simple ways, in ways that they can understand, not trying to wow anybody with your theological knowledge or anything. And even I've been guilty of that too. Somebody asks a question about the Trinity, and then you go way into some ancient church, very technical thing, and you're like, okay, we gotta pull back because I've just lost this person here. They have no idea what I'm talking about. And so more and more in America, it really is. It's akin to the Book of Acts in a way, except I think you could argue in the Book of Acts that the Jews at least had a more solid scriptural foundation at the time of Christ, at least as far as knowing the big arcs and the stories, than what people would have today. A generation or two ago in America, you could reliably get people to know at least most of the Ten Commandments, right? Or know some of the big Bible stories. And you just don't have that anymore in America. So it's more akin to the pagan evangelization in the Book of Acts.
Do you find that when you're starting a conversation with people, sometimes they just want to know what they're supposed to do? I mean, like, get saved, but like, what am I supposed to do? And like, how does that play? And then this will also dovetail in like to the Memento thing, but like, how do you tell them what to do without making that the new law? And like,
Sure.
how does that work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That typically is how people see religion. It's what are the statutes I must obey? And we do have statutes that you must obey as Christians. I know that's for some reason controversial, but it's the truth. To answer the question of how should we then live without it just being a Tony Robbins kind of motivational thing, it begins with the gospel. Okay, here's and not just the gospel in the sense of, okay, your sin debt is forgiven. Okay, because that's how a lot of the gospel is preached, right? That it's just simply, you did bad thing, but now your debt's erased, and then you're good. Okay. Now, there's a sense in which that's true. There's also a sense in which a lot of people have been deceived into thinking, I've said these magic words and at the rail somewhere, and so I'm good. Teaching them that in Christ they are a new creation, and now everything is different. Everything has changed. You've been brought into the kingdom of God from the kingdom of the world, from the kingdom of death, the kingdom of Satan. So now it's different. It's not simply a set of precepts. You have been changed, and now you are learning what it means to be a changed person, learning what it means to contend with the old Adam, always going back to the gospel, always going back to the forgiveness of sins, but learning, vocationally, what's it mean now? I'm a Christian and I'm a husband, I'm a father, whatever vocation God has given you, equipping them in those roles to not only evangelize their families, but to just simply bring their family up in the fear and admonition of the Lord. So it's a holistic sort of approach to things, and we shy away from that because of questions about the law. But sometimes men just do need, what should I do as a Christian husband? And if I say you should pray with your families, is that now law? Of course yes, and of course no. So teaching them how to do that instead of sort of a Methodistic, okay, now you're a Christian, so you can't touch alcohol again. You can never say a bad word again, which is how a lot of people see that. You're a Christian, so now you just have to watch the worst movies produced today or something like that. That is how a lot of people see the faith. And in one sense, that's not fair to Christianity because it wasn't intended to be that. But if we're honest, even with a lot of professing Christians, that's what the faith is to them. It's either a very reductionistic sinner's prayer kind of thing, or it's a question of rules for successful living. And if you start with the gospel, always bring people back to the gospel, showing how everything flows from that, it's a much healthier way to do it, but never shying away from giving them practical advice. It's okay to be practical. It's okay to give them nuts and bolts on how to do things.
So that kind of brings me to the Memento thing, which is a men's Lutheran devotional practice. And I did see when it was early on being pitched that there was concern from seminary professors, other pastors, that this would be something that would end badly. Like, I forget the men's movement, what that was.
Like Promise Keepers or something
Keepers,
like that?
Yeah, something like that. There was that concern that this would turn into that would get us in a direction that we would have to roll back and be, it would end badly.
Yeah, who knows? I can't see the future. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Anytime there's a movement toward men improving their character or improving their lives, then the specter of pietism is raised, right? And that's a long history to unpack, but it's just become a simple pejorative. Anything that tells you to do something is pietism. And so I don't think that would be a concern that I would have with anything. And here's where Memento, if it's done right, I think, can kind of avoid some of these pitfalls. Is it's not simply a program where a guy goes off on his own. The idea is there's supposed to be in-person groups where men are holding each other accountable, pastoral oversight, and those sorts of things. And there the pastor and the brothers together can make sure that people aren't falling into legalism. It is a real danger anytime you're talking about spiritual disciplines that people will become scrupulous about those things. And they'll say, okay, now I've sinned because I ate this, ate a particular food. We don't want to fall into that. Keep the priority of why am I abstaining from this? Why am I devoting X amount of time a day to prayer, for example? Understand the reason why we cultivate these disciplines, which is to focus more on Christ and focus more on the vocations that he's given us. That helps temper some of this. You're always going to have that thing, though. And if we say that, okay, because this pattern of discipline might cause someone to become legalistic, the answer is not to say, let's just simply eschew these things. Some people do need that kind of structure, or they're never going to develop any kind of prayer habit at all. And everybody should have some sort of prayer habit. It doesn't have to be what Memento says. It doesn't have to be what any particular prayer book says, but every Christian man should be praying regularly. And some people need those helps. And if we're not careful, then it turns into a criticism that, say, a Baptist might have of a Lutheran. We're using a prayer book. That's not real prayer. That's just rote prayer. That's legalism. You think you have to say these exact words. No, we provide these as a tool for people to use because not everybody can pray extemporaneously. Not everybody's comfortable with that. Not everybody has the clarity of mind to even think about it. Yes, I know that the Holy Spirit intercedes on our behalf, but I also know that if I can say 20 intelligible words versus 10 unintelligible words, somebody's more edified in one of those cases.
Makes sense. So yeah, it has been a great help for me because during the Lenten practices, I really got into an actual habit of prayer, morning prayer, and then doing the readings. So it's been tremendously helpful to me anyway.
Yeah, and that was at your Lutheran altar, not the Shinto altar that you keep behind it, correct?
Yes, that's in some of the other like that's an interesting one because yes, when we go over to some of the family places, there's the family shrine, and those are fascinating.
I mean, if it's Pure Land Buddhism, we can go with that. I think we can work with that, right? That's just Christianity and Buddhist clothes. So now I will get in trouble for saying that. For liability purposes, that was sort of a joke.
Yeah, I grew up going to a lot of those funerals. Those are fascinating. And now when I go, I'm like, I think we went to one, and I had to like tell my wife and I, because we were so used to giving the pinch of incense because that's just what it was just it's all cultural, right? We have no idea what the heck is going on. I'm like, oh, we I don't think we can do that, dear. I'm like, we should probably just sit here over on the side, even though it's our family, but it's like they're gonna look at us weird. But yeah,
sit here and be polite, right?
Yeah, that's the good Japanese thing to do anyway. Just be polite.
Right. It's very, very mannerly culture, which we appreciate. We have so much to learn from them.
It is that homogeneous society, though. It kind of makes a difference.
Yeah, this is true. It makes it a little easier in some ways.
Yeah, for rule keeping anyway. So related to the evangelism kind of question, there's this stuff surrounding pastoral formation in the LCMS, and then Pastor Kuntz mentioned that you gave a historical paper on pastoral formation. Can you kind of walk us through that? What was being argued and kind of the context that you found?
I'll go through just sort of rather quickly. You have the apostolic era, where pastoral training is informal. It's kind of person-to-person discipleship. Obviously, the real gold standard is the apostles who sat under Jesus. That's probably hard to beat. Lacking accreditation, however. But for the first century or so, you have people mentored by experienced elders. As the centuries go on, the emergence of catechetical schools for teaching doctrine, preparing leaders, bishops overseeing the training. By the time you get to Nicaea, things begin to be more formalized. By the time you get to the medieval period, you have monastic schools and cathedral schools, kind of the precursors to our universities, for example. And you're starting to see the formation of sort of the modern seminary. By the time you get to the Reformation, of course, you're going to have the establishment pretty firmly in Protestantism of the seminary system, kind of as we know it. Even up until relatively recently, you could be ordained without the MDiv. There's still ways to do that now, of course, but it grew from, when I say informal, I don't mean to say it wasn't in depth or anything, but you're one-on-one with an apostle, or you're one-on-one with a bishop or certain other priests and pastors. And then it becomes very formalized with the various iterations of the schools that do develop into what we have today. So we can honestly say that the mode of formation is an adiaphoron, but formation itself is not. So a person cannot just simply ordain themselves, for example. Then it becomes a debate on what is best for the church. A structured formal education at one or two or however many institutions, or a return to sort of the apostolic era where people are trained locally. And what I try to bring out in the paper is you cannot make the argument that training local pastors at the local level is sinful, because it's not. So then we have to make the case for the current seminary system being the best for training pastors. And that's what I left up to the other people speaking at the conference. That was their job. My job was to just give the historic overview, because I think sometimes we're bogged down in this question of it's sinful to train locally. And they'll turn around and say, well, it's sinful to charge all of this money and to make this there's your legalism, right? You can't be ordained unless you go through this system. And we end up talking past each other there. You can get conspiratorial and say that those who want locally trained pastors don't want to be Lutheran. There's probably some truth in that they don't want to be as constrained by the Lutheran identity of the seminaries, at least as far as liturgics go and things like that, which is a whole other discussion. But then they'll look suspiciously at the seminaries and say they're only existing to perpetuate the institution. So So what we have then, is to just kind of recap, is this whole development of pastoral training where you actually see both of these methods used. And so then we have to ask the question of which is actually best and what do you want? And when you're talking about a denomination the size of the Missouri Synod, then the question becomes, do we want uniformity in catechesis or in training rather? Yeah, and we want uniformity in doctrine. And one of the ways ideally, or one of the advantages ideally of a seminary is that people will be uniform in doctrine. It doesn't always work out perfectly. People slip under all the time. But it does become a question of, okay, we're going to argue over this in a Christian way and say, okay, which method is better? And I know that I'm kind of coming, it sounds like, with an olive branch, but I think that in some ways these two groups are in an impasse because they are so divergent in what they believe is best for pastoral training, and they're really quite divergent in some ways in what they believe is the best way to evangelize and to grow the church and to sustain the church and care for her. So I think if you scratch it more, you will find theological differences. I don't know that it's fair to say that they're 100%, that everybody in this debate is 100% the same theologically. We say we are, but your orthopraxy kind of shows what your orthodoxy is, and so and I'm not trying to slander anybody on any side here, but even like things like the mode of baptism, candidates for baptism, in some of these cases are very different from what you would see in a typical LCMS church. So there just are some honest differences there. And so it's questions of how do we approach evangelism then? So now you come to another practical question, not only how do we train, but how do we actually preach the gospel? And then ask the question, what is the gospel and how do we receive the gospel? And have these honest and deep discussions, I think, could be very helpful. People might see it as detrimental because it looks like it's this public display of disunity. But let's say for the sake of argument that it is, it's better to have those disagreements out there and to talk through those and see if we actually are walking together. And, instead of just saying we're walking together because we all have the same logo on our church websites, and people become, again, just very, very offended by that because of denominational identity. If the goal is really to train up the best pastors we can and to preach the gospel to as many people as we can, then let's set aside the branding question for a second and just talk about it biblically and confessionally and see where the chips fall.
Yeah, I'll give it this. I've listened to plenty of their sermons and watched their services online just to understand what they were trying to do. And I will honestly, they are very solidly they're very Lutheran. They want to adhere to the confessions in the way that they want to talk about things, but then the practice of it is where it gets a little sketchy, and that's the problem in my mind anyway. That's the propagation of that will start to cause a divergence in the local, like just the local things will just get weird, more exasperated and built upon, and then that's where the divergence comes from.
You look at the books they're reading or recommending sometimes, which have bad theology in them, not healthy. And as a person, for me, who didn't grow up in this, and I don't have the blood ties to it that a lot of these guys do, which is what you hear a lot. I'm a 7th generation LCMS pastor's kid, or something like that. Like and then everybody else gets called a Pharisee, but that's like the most Pharisaical argument I can think of. I'm Lutheran because my dad was. So, I come in and I know as a person who was studying theology outside of Lutheranism that when there are a few things that sort of readily identify something as Lutheran. And it's, of course, the theology of the Book of Concord, but it is also liturgics. It's the externals as well. And going to a Christian college that was steeped in all of the modern evangelical stuff and even had a hand in inventing some of the stuff, I have a lot of concerns when I see a Lutheran worship service that looks indistinguishable from a big box evangelical church. I think these people, their motivations are in the right place. I think that they truly want to reach the most people. But I've also seen that people burn out very quickly in these kinds of environments. And especially people, who are very interested in something with historic roots and something that's deep and apostolic, they walk into a Lutheran church expecting that experience, and they get nothing approaching that, then the question is, why this? And they might not stick around long enough to learn the theology. That's when they go off to the Anglicans or the Catholics or the Orthodox.
So, from your perspective, at a place, Arkansas, doing that, not a strong Lutheran, foothold. How do you guys experience like the pastoral shortage, or whatever we want to call it? Like, I guess pastoral shortage, for lack of a better term.
Well, the Mid-South District does have one of the lowest, if not the lowest, vacancy rates. So our President Pavla is very good about the vacancies being filled. And so we have not really suffered that. There are still congregations that are vacant, that need a pastor, but for certain reasons have not been able to get one. But we have weathered the pastoral shortage pretty well. Because, like I said, I think the district president is in a very good job in providing solid candidates. You see in a lot of our congregations a desire to recover Lutheran identity. And one of the things that being a Lutheran in an area like this is, it kind of makes you, it's iron sharpens iron sort of thing. And they know what they are in a lot of cases, or at least they appreciate more their uniqueness. And so that's a function, of being different. And so, we're not feeling the strain in the way that other districts are. And other districts are feeling that, maybe because of the pastor shortage, potentially because of the cost of a pastor and the size of the congregations. Could be as simple as demographics and location, too. People just don't want to move to certain places. And I won't name names because I don't want to insult any very cold districts or anything like that, or very expensive districts, to be fair. So, here we've got a lot of younger guys coming in to pastorates as well, very solid guys, working, and they kind of know the environment that they're in as well. It just makes you pivot and makes you think a lot more about what you are. And I find, at least in the case of my congregation, they're very eager to learn deeper Lutheranism. They're very eager to bolster up their apologetic skills when they're talking to their Baptist friends or whatever. So on the one hand, in the wrong context, it could be very detrimental. On the other hand, it's enabled us to really grow the congregation, to really shore up the congregation. And the fact is, a lot of people come here, a lot of the newer faces, because they were looking for historic Lutheranism, traditional liturgy, all of that kind of stuff. And they found us, and thus far, they're happy. Now, our next interview, if I'm in California or Nihon or someplace, maybe I've been ran out. But for now, they are pretty contented.
So, like, one of the places you mentioned, the Iowa Spanish-speaking congregation, that seems like an ideal, like, that's the kind of place where SMP would, like, that's what it was like built for. Would you agree with that? Is that where it could be used or should be used? That kind
I think
of situation?
it can be used there. And it kind of depends on the case. If you're looking at second and third generation immigrant children that are speaking English well, I believe that assimilation into the larger congregation is ultimately the better way to go. There is a temptation to keep ethnic churches ethnic. And this sounds like I'm countering the Japanese now. I'm not. But the kids are speaking English. It would be great for everybody if everybody could worship together. In the case of Iowa, you had essentially what happened there was Iowa beef producers, the workers went on strike. The company broke the strike and brought in a tremendous amount of Hispanic workers overnight, which changed the town. And so there's a ton of people who can't speak English, so on and so forth. So there, you've got to have a Spanish speaker. And yeah, it could be a case where SMP kind of makes sense because we don't have that many guys who speak Spanish who can go out and just start working. So you very vigorously train that guy, the SMP guy, hypothetically, get him going. They have a full-time pastor now. I don't know that he's SMP. But yeah, in those my understanding is that's what SMP was primarily designed for. Cases like this, it's used a little bit more broadly today, but yeah, that would be a case where it would absolutely make sense.
For the SMP program itself, do you have any gauge on the strength and weakness of the program itself?
I have met very good men who are in or went through the SMP program. As a guy who gave up a job that I had for a long time and went to seminary, it falls a little bit flat when people say, oh, my job is too good, so I'm going to go through SMP. And that's what I hear a lot of. I didn't want to move my family. Well, everybody had to move their family to go to seminary. Some could make the argument that we shouldn't be asking men to do that, and that's sort of a discussion for another time. But if the standard is go here, then I think the bar should be a little bit higher. And there's a lot of cases where it's just a normal congregation, like typical LCMS congregation, 60, 70, and they've got a full-time pastor, and now they've got an SMP guy. And my question is, why? But the training is a little bit less, but to be fair, the SMP training is a lot more than what you get at a lot of other American churches as far as pastoral training goes. An SMP guy is going to be educated better than a lot of pastors in other denominations out there in America.
The one that one of my friends is going through the cross ministry culture, whatever the acronym for that
the Irvine
one is.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Irvine one. And actually, my daughter goes to a church, Dr. Espinosa's church in Irvine. That they have a vicar going through that program as well. But I've talked to them, and like one of the things that they talk about is because they're in expensive areas, like California, like going off. Like if they sold their place to go to seminary, and then they're going to send them back, it's like, well, there was no that was a bad deal.
Sure. So, and on the one hand, you could make the argument, Lord, didn't we give up everything to follow you? On the other hand, everybody's making that argument, living pretty comfortably for the most part too. So I completely understand that. And if you have, call out elders from among you, there is a local base in the apostolic era. And again, I don't want people to think that I'm eschewing seminary education. Is absolutely not. I still think that's the way to go. But I still think these are fair questions, given the cost and the human toll that it takes with technology. Do I believe that you get the same experience with an online course as you do in-person seminary education? Absolutely not. I think that as far as that experience and that life together, that can't be replaced. And I think that the weight is on the traditional track. But at the same time, completely understand where people are coming from. But at the same time, though, we want to be careful and not make an argument that's purely worldly. It would be too expensive or too hard to go through, or I would have to move my cat, and I don't want to move my cat, or have to get rid of my dog or something like that.
Dr. Kutz and I talked about this. It's like the one side of the Synod always talks about not being trusted with their decisions and things like that. But I think a lot of that trust was built at the seminary, whatever, in person. Like if you have things completely online, I've done online classes and stuff like that, and I've worked with teams. I trust them to the extent that they may do the PowerPoint.
Right.
But when I want to build a company with them or, like stand shoulder to shoulder with them, I have no idea because I've only met them virtually. And
it is still, the COP that ultimately affirms all the candidates, and the way in which to get to know them is, it's kind of hard to replace knowing them in person. A virtual avatar is just not the same in many cases. And people are going to point to technology changing things, and it may well. We don't know what the future holds for education or anything like that. But if we're worried about those going out, at the very least, if we're going to do distance education, there needs to be robust supervision. And I would argue not just simply at the congregational level, but at the district level as well.
Makes sense. So based on your experiences and what we've talked about, what would you like to see pastoral formation look like going forward?
Yeah. I would honestly like to see more guys who are not ancient, but also not 20 going into seminary. Some guys with a little bit more life experience behind them. Not in the sense that we had to deal with in the seminary where guys always like, well, what I learned from my first divorce and my first failed business was like, not that kind of thing. But, tapping into some of those guys, which we don't have too many of because they're just getting started in their jobs and everything, but men who have a bit more experience as fathers and caring for the home, those sorts of things. I think that would be very beneficial to the church. I think that churches would be well served by those guys. Not that they can't be served by the young guys either, but I would like to see that. I would like to see mandatory chapel attendance because I'm a legalist, though. I would like it to be required. It's all in the honor system right now, but I would just force guys to sit through it. That's what I would do. And one of the things we do well still is a focus on languages. I think that that's very important. I think that seeing a bigger approach to evangelism, I would like to see robust liturgics, which Fort Wayne has, and robust, how do we contend for the faith? How do we actually talk to people? I mean, even things maybe that fundamental. How do we communicate effectively? That's what I would like to see shored up even more. And I would like to see the men equipped to read demographics and read their communities a little bit better. So maybe just very simple, nothing too exciting there, but to just know what you're getting into when you go into it, have men who kind of know how to deal with people, which are things that are harder to teach. Maybe that means going from a 1-year vicarage to a 2-year vicarage or something like that. Some have contended for a kind of a total redo of the system where you're kind of probationally ordained as a deacon and assigned under a pastor for a longer amount of time. I would be open to see what something like that would look like. It would be interesting to see. I mean, I'm already ordained, so I don't have to jump through those hoops, but easy for me to say on this side of the laying on of hands. So,
you
or the signing of the call document, if I'm going to be LCMS here.
The younger people, the younger men, especially, like having some social difficulties, I guess I might say. I'm not sure how it can, but like I have a story that just came up. My daughter's at Concordia Irvine, and one her friends are both pre-sem students. They were dating. It's man and woman, so like they're both pre-sem students. One wants to be a deaconess, the other one pastoral. But they were dating for a couple months, and they broke up because he did not like that her favorite hymn was "Lift High the Cross," which is a Methodist song, and that she takes the common cup. I mean, the individual cups. But they could not, they could not. They broke up because they could not reconcile. I'm like, whoa, that, I mean, like there's something not like it was. Yeah. So that.
Yeah. You do have some of that.
Young man, but
we appreciate his zeal. We'll put it that way. I mean, absolutely. These things are just, and maybe he was right. Maybe that was a red flag. Who knows? And there can be some of that. I mean, and there absolutely is a lot of that where, even some of the theological language we use, if you use the explanation of the Catechism from 41, it has different theological language from the 2017. And so some people, if you don't feel like these older congregational members, for example, are as Lutheran as you want to be, understand that they came by this honest, and they use different terminology. And so that's just the way it is. There is, unfortunately for some, a social aspect to the ministry that you just have to, you can't, it's interacting with people, so you have to be able to do that. Now, how you teach that in the classroom, I don't know, but I would remind people that in earlier times, they had vicarage manuals, which went so far as to tell you to brush your teeth and comb your hair. So people would lose their minds if we had that today. But it showed that there was a need to do that even back then, and they were a little less skittish about that in those times.
So also going along similar lines, do you have any thoughts on how we might address the underserved congregations besides changing the routes dramatically, but like how can we those 20 to 40 ish people congregations that need a pastor but can't afford what do you think about those? Those?
There's a few solutions. Some of it's going to be location dependent. How close are they? Things like that. I mean, one, as you've already mentioned, is the idea that we lower the standard for training and just install a local guy there. Suppose that's an option. Another option would be to not have what we think of as traditionally dual parishes, but kind of a mother congregation situation where the more viable congregation is providing pastoral care to that congregation as a ministry to try to revitalize it or simply to try to serve the members that are there. And I've seen that work very well. I've seen that work better than a traditional dual parish model in a lot of ways. It might sound a little bit paternal, but in the cases I've seen it, all parties have been very grateful and been blessed going both ways. So you don't have to close the congregation. That congregation is served, but they don't have this full burden that they would normally have. And they get pretty much a full-time pastor out of that. Another option is consolidation. And I think that would be healthy in cases where they are 20 minutes apart, but they don't want to give up the building. And that's a very hard thing for people to do. It's easy for me to sit here and say, well, just close your building. But people are very attached to this, and not necessarily in a sinful way. They just cherish this church and hate to see it go. We have no mechanism here where a district president can come in and just say, okay, you're closing. And a lot of people would like that. And I promise you, you would love that system until the bishop was not on your side, until you're on the chopping block. Then you wouldn't like it. So maybe a working together in this situation at first, without having to reinvent the system. Are there places where the pastor in one place can serve this place in addition to? That is more work on the pastor, but he might be willing to do that. I think this, instead of this is my congregation and that's your congregation, this idea of we all have the same goal, we all have the same confession, we're all working together. How can we do that? And so you have the mother church kind of model there that might be able to help some of this stuff.
We have the problem. We had, I think at our height, I think there were 6 calling congregations. I think now there's like 3, 4, 5, something. It's still like a huge problem out here. Just a pitch for the way we did it is we have a parsonage on our property, and our pastor, has his own place. He moved out of that a while back. But so we have a seminary student that we called out. So Vicarage, we have a vicar, and we share that vicar with one of the other congregations that couldn't afford.
Yeah.
And so we flip it. The thing that is in all these cases, both churches are making sacrifices. And I think that's one I know from my pastor who was the circuit visitor for a while. That was the most difficult thing, is to get the two congregations to give and take. It was like as much as he's like, this shouldn't be that hard, but it really is when it comes to people, that the people just
absolutely.
don't, I can't change the 9 a.m. service to 11 because we've never had 11 o'clock service. And he's like, but we could get you a pastor every week if you just change it to 11 or just an hour or a half an hour shift. But just certain congregations would not do it, and it's like it was just an eternal frustration of a circuit visitor, I guess.
Right.
All right. So while doing this research for this episode, one thing, this is a brief history of power question. So I came across this interesting feedback. The observation was that, in the early days, the show had a different feel because the previous co-host would just randomly go off on tangents that, they're interesting and they were fascinating, but they were like, it would be something far afield. And Dr. Kuntz would always have to argue from first principles to bring things back. Mm-hmm. Like, is that dynamic doesn't quite exist anymore? Do you see bringing that kind of thing back, or does your personalities not lend to that? Or
I mean, we can always be mindful of it. Usually when Adam and I are going into something, it'll either we both know enough about it, or we'll say, hey, you're taking the lead on this one. I come from a radio background, years of radio hosting. So without spoiling how the magic is made, there are ways that we go about an interview that is a little bit different. And what you still have, I think, with both versions are two friends who are talking, so it comes across as friendly, pretty cozy, but we're kind of talking at a different level, not talking around each other. And so we're going on that. So yeah, we can always back off and come back and lighten the load a little bit. I guess is that what you're asking? Is to just
it's more of the not lighten the load, but because of pulling things back. Like, I think there are some people that aren't quite getting the foundation why you guys are talking this way. You are.
Yeah.
And so because there's you're not necessarily looking for an argument or pushback. It's just that there's more foundation being laid when you guys are if you were in two different, coming from two different vantage points, I guess.
Yeah. So instead of starting at the top of the tower, we start at the bottom and build our way up. Yeah. To make the argument. Yeah. We'll keep that under advisement. We can certainly make that happen. Now, granted, from week to week, who knows what the show's going to be. So some weeks, it's going to be a little more complicated than others. But yeah, we can certainly work on that. We'd be happy to do it. You have a lot of sway with the show. So
So one last thing, going on to cryptids.
Sure.
Yeah. How did you become that guy? Or like where did this come about?
And, it sort of happens naturally. Everybody loves cryptids, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to know about Bigfoot or the Mothman. So
I was a big Art Bell, so the Chupacabra was always the
took the words out of my mouth. I'm a radio guy, but I grew up listening to Art Bell, and my one dream is to just settle in Japan and master the sword. But the other one is to just be Art Bell. And way back in the Word Fitly days, I noticed no Lutheran really talks about this weird stuff. It's not in the Lutheran character to get weird with it. So we're going to get weird with it. We're going to talk about UFOs and then there's a huge audience for this stuff out there, and so that just threw fuel on my fire to talk about it more. And it's easy to be the guy for something in the LCMS when you're literally the only guy. So,
but
we have Art Bell.
There's enough interest that people want that guy to come on and talk about it.
Oh, people love this stuff, and it's great. If I do a conference and I'm talking to somebody, or people are handing me Bigfoot air fresheners, it's always fun. And one of the nicest things, and I can't remember if this was an email or if this was a person. I think it was a person talking to me at a conference. They're like, we don't like, our young boys really like the show, but we don't let them listen to every episode because of some of the content. But they get very excited when it's a cryptid episode, and they love listening to it. I'm like, oh, that's endearing. Well, thank you. I've captured the important 10 to 12-year-old demographic in Lutheran podcasting. So very happy for that.
So what do you think, brings that about? Like, why are we fascinated by those things?
Yeah. We're coming out of the new atheism, which collapsed pretty spectacularly, I think. And everybody, that was edgy, kind of Reddit edgelord for a long time, new atheism, they found that hollow, and then they said, well, if there is an invisible world, what's in it? And so people are naturally curious about the things they can't see or the mysterious. And more people, especially if you follow social media, it's not like it was in the mid-2000s where it was all, zeitgeist and here's the 10 reasons why God doesn't exist. Now it's, here's this weird Eastern view on this, or here's this Wiccan view. So you have this peculiar thing happening where Christians are very much interested in the mysterious stuff, like they weren't before, because it was seen as too weird to talk about. You have a whole new group of people who are coming in who have kind of eschewed a naturalistic worldview, but they're latching on to all other supernatural worldviews. And so now's the time to speak to it. And even when I'm talking about Bigfoot, that's a perfect time to talk about, biblical things or the supernatural or whatever. And so people are curious about it. So strike while the iron's hot. And people, I think they've been edified. If they've not been edified, they've at least been entertained. And so we can do worse than that.
All right. Well, Pastor Grills, thank you so much for being on. I'd like to have you on again sometime. I'd love to talk. I want to start talking about people about the practices in their church and like how they do confirmations and like,
sure,
because how consistent that is across the synod is kind of like one of the things I'm kind of interested in exploring, because I know some people use the Small Catechism, or I would hope most people do, but I understand that there are some that don't, and like it's just fascinating to like what local practices are like. So I'd like to have you on.
Definitely happy to come back and talk that out with you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Grill or Pastor Grills.
Thanks for the promotion. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you.